So she shuttles between India and several other countries. Canada happens to be one of them, where she is at the moment. For almost 20 years, Sarika was with ActionAid, and around the time when she left them, she was she was one of the leads on women's rights and one of the directors of ActionAid International. So we've already lost a little bit of time in waiting for the participants to join us. I'm not going to stretch this too much, except to say that Sarika is deeply involved in the autonomous women's rights movements in India and internationally. And I had the pleasure to see her moderate a session on transnational feminism, where we had invited speakers from Canada and from India, um, which was a great learning experience for me. And the topic of today's session, what's in the F word, I thought would generate a lot of intrigue and people would be curious to know what she's going to talk about. So without much ado, I hand it over to Sarika. Sarika, welcome and thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for those lovely, warm, and kind words. Um, I can't tell you how much it warms my heart to actually see the lot of us coming together the way we have. And I also want to tell you that, I get very, very inspired by the conversations that happen in our WhatsApp group. And I think they are pretty serious, and they are a lot of analysis of what I call patriarchy in everyday life. So, just to begin with, what's in the F word, it is derived from a study circle that I run only with men, and I had to get men curious enough. So, you come thinking that the F word is that four-lettered word, and we'll be talking a lot about it. There were times when they asked me, aren't you going to talk about positioning and what women actually like? And I had to explain that, women are not a homogeneous category. So while some of us like to be on top, some of us like to explore many positions. So I'm not going to unpack that four-letter word for you. You'll have to do it yourself, do some work yourself. Because patriarchy does give you a very strong position, and that positionality is very important because it invariably makes you the oppressor, and sometimes you might not be aware of the word that you're actually an oppressor, and normalize it. So that's how we got the title, because Varsha and I were talking one day, and given the sisterhood that we have, which seems like a very long time back, and though I've known her for such a short span of time, I think we decided to talk and put this as the buzzword, just to get everyone a bit more curious. So the F word is for feminism, right? And I want to go back to the series of trainings that I do across, and I want to tell you that why I say what's in the F word is there is so much of curiosity and so much of misogyny that I see in that word. So while you could be a leftist and so-called progressive, you will not be asked like, oh, so what's the big deal about Marx and Mao? But I have had in one of the trainings that I do in the MENA region, where you only have people with mostly people who have been in amidst conflict. I remember one person asking me like, "Oh, so what's your stand on religion, and what's your stand on Islam, and do you have religious feminists?" And irrespective of how oxymoronic that might sound, there is a very strong group called religious feminist. But that led me to think that I always had to explain, why am I a feminist? Because the moment you say the word feminist, it invariably boils down to misandrists. So we are the haters of men, and we want a world without men. And that led me to think like, how come they don't know the real story, but they know very particularly about radical feminism, and one part of radical feminism, and which is what they keep shooting back at you. And I realized that most of the spaces I had to be very defensive to talk about feminism and to explain, like, oh, I'm a feminist, but there is always a but. And I remember that in one of the trainings that I was doing with a mixed group in Latin America, a man who was the father of five children, and we'd go on, we were in the fifth day, so we were dealing with sexuality and in great detail, not positioning still, but the politics of sexuality. And I remember that one person told me, oh, women also get an orgasm, and that shocked me. uh, because to not have known, and then I started realizing that a lot of people did not know that women do get an orgasm, and sometimes they get more than one. And I was very tempted to call it what is in the O word then, but then I have refrained from doing that because there is a lot of explaining that one needs to do. Now, that's having said that, I was thinking that one good part that I do want to share with you on a more serious note, um, because all of us know that patriarchy is not just about what you do in workspaces. We bring home a lot of it, and that is why we talk about personal is political. So I was looking at this very cryptic, cartoon that was circulating very recently about I end my one shift and move on to another. So how do we counter it? And you've had a whole series of things that are thrown back at us. So one of the first things that I heard was men are physically stronger. And I said, oh, but by that logic, the biggest WWF person should be the president of United States or UN. Or maybe let's even get beyond the species and look at blue whales and elephants, and they should be ruling the earth. But the fact remains that women are not physically weaker, you know. And nowadays, the studies that you will see, um, will invariably have the number of hours that women do on an average, that they are working from, whether it's the work shift or whether it's the home shift or whether it's the thin line between the two. And I don't like the depoliticization in terms of calling it the care work, because it's very, very strongly politicized. But on an average, starting from continents, uh, say for instance in South Asia, where women on an average do 5 hours more, to even Europe where they do 3 hours more, and when it gets to women with smaller children, younger children, that number of hours is even more. And I started getting into facts about why is it that you would feel that women do less work, because we don't. And it's not just about carrying headloads of fuel and firewood on your head. Um, and the other thing that I keep hearing very often and is women are women's worst enemies, as you can see from this group. We are like crabs. We don't let one woman go up, and then all of us will be jealous. And there was one point in time when wherever I went, I had taken the quotes from that particular area, and they are very interesting. And I'm hoping to read out some of them today for you if we have time. So, like here, amongst indigenous women, there is a very big quote like, make sure that your woman is doesn't have boots during winters, and make sure that she is pregnant during summers. So if she's pregnant during summer, she cannot run away. And if she doesn't have boots in winters, then obviously it's so much of snow that she just cannot walk. But then this fear, this constant fear of women running away because they are oppressed is something very subtle that we don't acknowledge, but it's there nevertheless. And with Kenya, with India, you have the Tirya Charitra, जो अपने बाप की नहीं होगी हुई वो किसी की कैसे होगी. But then we live in patrilocal, patrilineal systems, so it's a coercion for us to get married and move into our husbands' houses, and not just change our names but our gotra. And in lots of societies you also have the first name that's changed. So I could be from Sarika Sinha to Varsha Mehta. And while I wouldn't mind that, but Shakespeare says what's in a name, but there's a lot that's in a name, and there is an identity that I have, and I don't want to lose it. I remember that I got married to my classmate, and probably if I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have married anyone else. I was having a bit of a problem because um, two of my sisters were actually murdered in cold blood dowry deaths, and I was beginning to get quite upset about it. And it's these personal sharings, that make us the person that we are. I was looking at somebody who very beautifully was circulating a marriage, a Punjabi movie trailer around marriage about why women do not go. And that was very interesting because of this whole institution called marriage, a very sacrosanct institution which we do not critique. But in feminism, we tend to critique religion. We're going to not take anything as sacrosanct. So coming back to women being women's worst enemies, which we often hear, I haven't come across houses where two brothers haven't fought for property. And if you look at the history of kings and kingdoms, you will see that it's replete with that. But we don't say that men are men's worst enemies. And what does it take to understand that women are as good or as bad as men? Right? So we can be equally cunning and conniving and capitalist, because that's the kind of societies that we all grow up in, and our families and our workspaces are microcosms of these societies. So we're not given a feminist orientation when we are in the womb, right? And that is why you have women who are patriarchal and you have men who are feminist. So you have people who believe in equality who are feminists, and you have people who don't. So it can be men, women, or diverse sexual orientations on both sides. Doesn't take rocket science to understand that, but it's often thrown at us like, she was a woman but she was trying to pull back another woman, which means the result generalization is that women are women's worst enemies. And it's these kind of myths that we really need to break. But I've said too much. I want to show you some few slides of a piece of work that I feel very proud of. It's something that I was trying to in 2008. I was trying to do some piece of work around the history or the history of feminism, as to how this inequality came into being. And in course of that, I did travel a bit. I was supposed to register and do my PhD with Jada Lerner, who's a landmark in feminist studies, and I couldn't because she was no more. But it's replete with pictures, and I thought you might like it. So I'm just going to take like 15-20 minutes, and then we just going to open it for not really. I don't say that it's a binary and I'll answer all the questions, but let's all brood and mull over them together. Does that work, Varsha? Okay. Oh my gosh, I don't know how to. Oh, sorry, I might need to share an application, right?
An
Mm,
application or a presentation?
yeah, it's a presentation. I got hold of it.
Okay. Now, you can also press a Control Shift D, or you're starting to share screen. We can
Yeah,
see it.
can you can see it? That's
Yes.
amazing. Okay. Right. So I'm not getting into this patriarchy, but I do want to ask you, what do you think? Has patriarchy always existed? Was it always the kind of system in which we lived? And since if you look at it now, we probably don't remember a lot of systems which were different. And though, you'll feel that some of the cultures, like they talk about Nayars and Nambiars, and they all talk about Khasi tribes in Northeast as matriarchal. They're not really matriarchal, they are more matrilocal. Um, so so I wish we had time to talk about it, but let me tell you that of the total percentage of human population, as in the Homo erectus mode, since we stood on two feet, uh, which is about 200,000 years, as they often say in his people who have interpreted it and noted it down. as opposed to that 200,000 years patriarchy is only about 10,000 years old, which is about 5% of our total civilization. It's just that initially you had this period of primitive communism, and then you had things happening, and then the discovery of the wheel and fire and a lot of other things. But before that, you had matrilinear or mother-right matrices. And for those people who really want to get deep into it, I would suggest two things that you must go through. First one is, of course, Gerda Lerner. She's interpreted it very well. But for people who really want to study on the Indian context and engage with women on the grassroots, I really like Rahul Sanskritayan's Volga Se Ganga Tak. It's a very, very well documented group, and it picks up, civilizations from across India. So I'm what I'm trying to do is sort of uncover last 30,000 to 50,000 years of history, as in history under quotes. Actually, it's herstory. And uh, and you know uh, more from, because there was no documented stories then. So whatever you come across is more in terms of the cave paintings and the interpretation of cave paintings, and a lot of it is from archaeology. So what you dig and what you get. And if you're interested, I will take you through very detailed notes as to how I came across one conclusion. But let me move as of now. Very interesting thing is that the male role in reproduction initially was not understood. So it was understood that by some magical power invested, women became pregnant. And if you look at the way we have mapped our gods, which is just one thing that I picked up, uh, children derive their identity more from mothers and families. And if you look at Mahabharata, you will see that that was a point of transition from matrilineal to patriarchy. You do see that the sons or the daughters are referred more in terms of their mother's name, so Kunti Putra, right? And also, if you look at when you had kings who could not who kings and queens who could not conceive, a very tacit thing to do was to call someone who was higher in caste, like a rishi. But these rishis were not really looking at women. There was proper sex happening for people to be born, which was a very accepted norm. So, women have held positions of power and authority. And if you look at just one factor that I'm going to talk about now, um, the gods that we have, that it says quite a bit about our societies. So, if you look at Lakshmi ji pressing Vishnu ji's feet, you will know the kind of ideal women that we are envisaging. Or how the interpretation of Kali itself has changed, and she's one of the eternal and old age goddesses. But now when she steps on Shiva, her tongue is out, saying that I made a mistake. uh, so I'm just looking at the mother right societies. Let me take you 30,000 years back and just show you pictures, flood you with pictures. So the concept of the divine took a female form, obviously, because the only way you could increase the number of people in your tribe, which was a primitive period, was to have more number of people, so that more number of people could go out and they could hunt. And it was a very here and now existence. And so you look at the pre-patriarchal societies, from Europe to China, from North America to Latin America, and from South Asia to Middle East. It is only the mother goddesses who are being worshipped. So across Africa, and this is more in discussion with the people who, as and when they worshipped, you have Ala, Anansi, Astria, Bahuban, Game. In Asia, you have Kundalini, Bhavani, Durga, Kali. In Tibet, you have Chomo Lungma and Khonma. And in China, you have Mat Chinai and Kuan Yin. And I'll show you and how they do look like. Egypt and Middle East, I couldn't get a lot of pictures, but I do have some current representations of these goddesses. You do have Osset and Aniket, who are like really worshipped. So you have Ala and Anansi, and Anansi is a spider goddess. So she's quite a trickster. She's not this stereotyped, gentle, caring woman. And that's the first picture that you see is of Anansi. And in the center, you see is Ala. And I'm not trying to show you any kind of semi pornography, but her holding her breast and having a thick middle part, the uterine part, the reproductive part, actually shows that she's capable of giving birth to a lot of children. And this was a point in time, and from that point, when you are worshipped because of your capacity to bear children, to now, when you most of the cultures have about 10 to 40 days of untouchability after you have given birth. You see how matrilineal to patriarchy has dawned, and for something that was celebrated earlier, say your periods, which is now very, very stigmatized. And I haven't come across cultures which put a woman on a higher pedestal because she is menstruating. And the third picture again is more of a recent interpretation of so you'll see that model like picture of 30, 34, 24, 34, but she's got her children. So you look at Nagame, and I can go into detail, but she's a serpent goddess, and that you will keep coming across serpent goddesses who change their forms. But the main thing that was being worshipped was the right to live. And once people die, when they move into a different realm, because the concept of hell and heaven was not so predominant then, you know, how do you help a person cross over? And look at the kind of aura that she exudes. Uh, if you look at Konma and Kuan Yin, Kuan Yin, I really want to bring your focus to, is actually the upper and the inner lip of the vagina. And from that to worshipping the shivling, are questions that I kept asking myself. And it's one of the few tablets which is not very, very available these days. And if you look at Konma, because Tibet is close by, you see all these Chitijal Pavak Gagan Samira, all the five elements that make a woman and kind of complete her. So that's one woman in herself. I haven't brought out the pictures of Kundalini Bhavani, but in another presentation, I do that a lot because I did that much more in detail for India. And in across old indigenous people, you will see that they still worship, like Bhils, who are very high in population in central India. They worship Rani Kajal, and Rani Kajal can often be just 12 stones, and not for all the 12 seasons that at one point in time we might have had. Now you will also come across, if you talk to very old people, that there used to be 5 seasons which have now boiled down to 4, and probably we might not even have that because there are larger issues of climate change. Now Auset and Aniket, this, I don't know the second tablet how visible it is. I don't want to get into the first one because that is more of a recent interpretation. But you see this woman imparting justice, and in which she probably is holding someone by his head and beating that person. So you also kind of know the kind of norms that were happening there in that particular point in time. Yeah, I do have one picture of Kundalini and Bhavani, but if you look at the left and the central one, you will see that from not being sorry to a point in time which is more of a recent interpretation of Kalini or Kundalini. And if you look at the right picture, that was one I clicked, like from a very, very old indigenous temple, which you go back to Nagabe and you look at the serpent representation of the goddess, and you see that kind of repeats here. um, so, you move ahead. These were the first civilizations, and you move ahead a little and you go to Europe and Latin America and North America. You see, one thing that's also happening now is that, as people moved from, areas where they were trying to have a here and now existence to looking and interpreting and understanding more of nature, you have two things. One is that you are scared of nature because there is lightning, there is thunder, there is rains. And two is you're very intrigued by nature. So you look at butterfly and birds, which have always intrigued humans. And what you see is a kind of hybrid representation of the two combined, but it's still a woman who holds that power. So Europe, you'll have crown butterfly and bird goddess. Latin America has Chacomocoatl, and North America has Avitlin Sita and butterfly woman. And that's a crowned butterfly. And for people who are wondering, how the breast and the vagina area are very, very predominant, because that is what gives you power in terms of reproduction, right? And then you mix that with wings. Venus is still worshipped. So if you look at the rightmost down picture, it's one where she's giving birth and she's in labor. And in the center, you again have this very full pregnant belly goddess Venus. And Venus is still worshipped in Europe, but her representation has changed. She's now become this woman who's uh, often objectified sexually, and has that perfect figure, not the way all of us are, like not that striving to be the 36, 26, 36 figure. And the first one again is of the bee goddess. And the V is very, very prominent, and there is a lot of interpretation of the V and why it's there. Um, in Latin America, Aztec is still worshipped, but now she's become this uh, neutral character, from becoming from a very, very feminine, as in not in stereotyping feminine, but as in a very reproductive and revered character to this one. And the third one is more of a recent interpretation, but it does feature in their old paintings about women's survival with ecology and ecological justice, which I think must have later on gone on to become one of the central points of ecological feminism. So how did patriarchy come to dominate human societies? So, if you look at the recognition of male role in reproduction, which some historians believe happened as a result of domestication of animals, so men knew that there was something happening here. It wasn't magical that the women were becoming pregnant. And then there was rising human population and a very strong here and now existence. Another thing that's happening is that agriculture, which a lot of historians believe was discovered by women, and heavily pregnant women, as they sat and threw over these seeds. So when struggles over land and resources started breaking out, one thing that's very closely linked with patriarchy is private property and state. And human survival dictated that it was the young men who were sent to battle, but that is not because they were more powerful, which is often the logic given to us now. That is because they were more dispensable. Because a man dies, he dies, but a woman dies, you don't know how many children she could have born and strengthened the community. But that's not something that we learn now, right? And so, as men fought over this territory and seized captives from losing group, and let me also tell you that the first group ever, the first class, and I don't mean class here in Marxian sense, that was actually enslaved were women. And if you look at Jordan Lerner, when she talks about Sumer, which is one of the oldest kingdoms, and when the king catches hold of people and makes them captives, he sends a message to his queen that keep the virgin and beautiful women for me to ravish, and then maybe virgin and not so beautiful for the army to ravish, and then the rest can be sent on to agricultural fields to work. And let me tell you that it was always that women's labor was hyper exploited, but an additional thing, men's labor was also hyper exploited when they were enslaved. But the additional thing that remains was women's reproductive labor was always, always exploited. And so, as men fought over these territory and enslaved women and enslaved territories, there was the concept of private. Until that point in time, you have societies which have lived in a form which is known as primitive communism. And so, even if you now look at Forest Rights Act, you will see a part of it with all the primitive groups always remains community over communities access and control over a certain resource, not a very private thing which evolved out of capitalism. And these are the initial thoughts and forms of capitalism. And so, sorry, the concept of commodifying and owning other human beings was also born. And one way of keeping a woman subjugated and having your own child, because with the concept of private came the concept of owning land. It was a point in time when agriculture had been born, and so it was not a here and now existence. So you could save the food that you had, which was called surplus, and surplus is big in left progressive literature. It also features quite a big in Indian literature if you read Lohia and Lohia's critique of Marx. Uh, so you could save it, but you want to give it away to somebody who you own, right? And the only way of doing that was to keep women's sexuality very, very, very limited. And that day, and you look at it now, you will understand that the whole ballyhoo is around controlling our sexuality. So, your periods are mapped before you're married so that you get the periods at the right time. And, they're mapped after the marriage so that you don't get them. So, hopefully, you're pregnant. And that takes a primacy, but in a very different manner, in a very derogatory manner. And, I've often heard, and I have asked my question every time I go out, and on all of us go out, is sleeping with someone only on our agenda? I mean, like, और भी गम है इस दुनिया में मोहब्बत के सिवा, as Ahmad Faiz says, right? So just to come back to it, so the sexuality, reproduction, and mobility of women was really captured. It wasn't a very weak and a peaceful fight. I can take you through a lot of other details some other day when we have more time. And there was that began the subjugation of women and the institution of marriage, religion, state. Incidentally, one of the first people who worked around it was a guy called Frederick Engels. And Frederick Engels had, being the left Marxist progressive guy that he was, and harping on a couple of women, and was a big sleeper around. He actually went to the London Library in 1800s thinking that the first disparity that arose on the face of this earth was based on class, which is haves and have nots. But found out that no, it wasn't that. It was based on genders. It was the women who were the first class to be oppressed. And that's when he went on to write this book called The Origin of Family, Private Property, and State. I'm a big critique of that book now, but it's a good initial read if you would want to hand it over and have it by your bedtime. It's very easily available on the net. There are norms of masculinity and femininity, and another big issue I don't want to get into great detail, but that's a patriarchal version of history. And I just thought I will take you some of the examples that I came across as I travel. The Chinese feet binding, like 3 inches long, so that you couldn't be mobile. And go back to what I was linking it up with the indigenous people here about women's mobility. Vrindavan, the place for de-sexed women, because once you don't have a man, then your sexuality is useless. It's surplus sexuality, and you would want to curb it, and that's why you don't dress up. So it's very different when a man becomes a widower, and very different when a woman becomes a widow. That's one thing that I came across in the Balkan states. So this man, apparently the man looking person is holding his own picture, and that was actually a woman. And that's my linkage to capitalism and feminism. So if you have a generation which doesn't have a single son, then what you do is proclaim someone as a virgin. It's called Burnesha, Burnesha. And she lives her entire life as a virgin, because she's not supposed to have children and let the children inherit them, till in the next generation, maybe of her sisters, somebody else has a son and hands it over. So she behaves and dresses exactly like a man. So that's not a man, that's actually a woman. That's a Barnesha whose name, who goes by the name of Haki, and would perform all the masculine roles and also behave like a masculine person. I also have a very good picture that I could suggest if you wanted to get a little more into this one. You have female genital mutilation, on which I'm really working right now across Africa. And they were telling me that, apart from genital mutilation, one thing that they were talking about was labia elongation. So, you elongate the labia so that the men get more pleasure out of it. But, the whole obsession with controlling our sexuality so that you don't derive pleasure out of sex, as if that was all that we were about. is something that we really need to pin it down and start speaking about. I'm just going to stop here, and we have 15 minutes left, uh, and have hear your thoughts around it, and what are you thinking? Open it up for your own experience sharing.
Wow, that was something. Right. Um, who all do we have here? Anyone? Yes. Amrita says beautifully explained. And before that, she had a comment about the Kamakhya Devi,
Yes.
who is also worshipped in her. I mean, it's the yoni and the menstruation that is worshipped in Assam.
Thank you,
Uh,
Amrita. That's a very, very critical intervention. Yes, and you know how now the mandir closes for 5 days when she menstruates, because last time I
yes,
was there,
yes. It
I was
happens in June every year, so the time is coming up.
yeah, but
People are
that
planning.
wasn't happening earlier, you know.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it happens in the month of June every year, and so there is this. Uh, there's the original site of where the temple is,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the priest gets the red. It's actually some kind of a cloth which is supposed to represent the blood, and that is distributed amongst the worshippers as prasad from
Yes.
goddess Kamakhya. It's quite something, actually.
Yes, yes. And I've always wondered, like, why is it that during periods somebody would ask me not to touch a charka dabba, and you wash your hands and you keep your hands wet and you touch the charka dabba, it's going to get fungus, right?
Absolutely.
And then Nepal was crazy because they have a system called gufa. So आपको जमीन पे सोना है, right? And you cannot go out in the sun, but during periods I want to go out in the sun and have that warmth.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Neha, why don't you talk about your experience in Bastar? I know you were there for a very long time, and it's so good to see
Yes,
you here.
Neha. Yes, Neha, please, let's hear you.
Hi, ma'am. So good to see you. I don't know if I'm allowed to start my video, but I'm still trying.
Please do,
So I
please
I
just
do.
saw
wanted to
you
Please go
in
say,
ahead.
between, Sneha. I saw your video was on, and I saw you. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if it's allowed, but I'm still gonna do it. So Sarika ma'am was one of the few seniors who inspired us to go into NGO sector during that time. And I got a chance to work with her under one internship opportunity. It was like a very small opportunity for 15 to 20 days. But I remember eating her head and asking her weird questions about life, which I can still do. But yeah, I mean, she's one of the, and I think Renuka Saroha ma'am was the another one who sort of given us the hope that women can survive in NGO sector. So, and ma'am, such a wonderful talk. I'm amazed. I never thought of all this.
I'm just so happy
Like
to
for me,
see you.
even now, if someone asks me which is your favorite god, I will say probably Shiva. Not thinking that why is it that I am able to relate more with a male rather than a female god. And
It's
so I
very
was,
normal. It's
yeah, I
very
was just hearing about
normalized.
Bastar. So Bastar has a huge tradition of having village goddesses. So each village has a different goddess, and they have a festival where they go to meet each other and greet each other. And that was very like amazing for me because the entire community believes that that goddess is the one which is protecting them. Now they are shifting more towards Ganesh and other Hindu gods,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is a very
yeah.
controversial topic. We can't talk
Yeah.
about it in India, but yeah, very, very interesting talk, ma'am. Thank you so much. Loved hearing it.
Well, thank you so much, Sneha. I must tell you that you are inspirational, and I've been following you, It's amazing what you've done. Yeah, yeah. But just to come back to what Sneha is saying, and as if the patriarchs were not enough, now you have also have the right wing Hindutva fascists. She's talking about something very interesting. How Shiva is pushed down our throats. I wondered if Sneha would talk a little bit about the Ghotul system that Bastar had, and that one of my postings was in Chhattisgarh, and the with some of these indigenous people, the tribes as we call them in India, the Ghotul system was a place where young people could mix and sleep. So sexuality was not so,
Repressed.
yes, and
That was the Gonds. It was the amongst the Gonds, right?
yes, also amongst other communities that I came across later. But now you have this system being totally banned because a woman cannot be sullied. Your vagina just cannot be seen, and it cannot be touched, or you cannot be entered. Right, as if an entire thing rested here, and now it's on the brink of extinction. Don't see Gotuls anymore. I also feel that. Nowadays, in Bhagoria, which was a system amongst Bhils and Bhilalas, which was a day that you could offer a pan to a woman, and a woman could offer a pan to a man, and ask them to be with each other. And but that's the government is just banning these practices. It's typical Brahmanical Hindutvavadi thing in which how your sexuality is likely to be very very repressed. It's like just sleep with your husband in the vanilla sex. Don't aim for anything else. So yeah, it's a very very it's something that really perturbs me, and as if these patriarchs were not enough.
But if you look at it, it just feels like, that they are more progressive and they have been more progressive than all of us.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that's what at least I thought when I heard about Gotul and I saw these women. And there's a culture where you can, if you don't like your husband, you can simply run away with someone else, and it's considered as absolutely normal and accepted. And the
Yes.
another thing that, from feminist point of view, which I saw was when the girl got married, the entire family told the girl that we are there with you, no matter what happens, we are here. Compared
Mhm.
to the society where I come from, which is a very no, I wouldn't say my parents are conservative, but it's very traditional, where girls are told that you are supposed to live with your husband no matter what. I
And
was
yeah,
in
that
shock when I went to Bastar because I was like, are these people really like behind us or we are behind them?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I come from Bihar, and I'm very glad, Sneha, that you started this discussion on a very personal note. And I'm going to share something which is very, very deeply intimate to me. So the generation before me, like my mother's generation, and for olders in my mother's generation, and my mother was the one who told me about it. um, Whenever there was the birth of a child, they would keep a girl child, they would keep the girl child out in the sun, and for the entire day, so by evening she doesn't survive. And that's and before that I wasn't wondering, but then I would say, like, I have four uncles and I have 12 brothers, but where are the girls? And later on, I became a part of a study that Lancet did on disappearing daughters, and across Morena and the northern part of Madhya Pradesh, and the area which is NCR and Haryana and Punjab, which has a very adverse sex ratio. I met women who were forced to kill their own children, and then I came across clinics which said. 500 अभी खर्च करो 5 लाख बाद के लिए बताओ. So how technique and technology was being used to eliminate women. And that year in 2008 in Lancet, it says we kill about 1600 girl fetuses every day. And and then I had right to life people who said, no, 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 you're not supposed to adopt to abort a child. And like, no, 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 you don't get it. It's my body. Right? But on right to life, I still, like, last year when I was teaching, there was this entire group of nuns who were in my class in Canada. And they said, if your mother had the sense, you would have never been born. And that remains how much of boggy waters all of us pass, and how much of violence and inequality we have internalized. I have to remind myself every day not to be one of those oppressors, and it's not that I'm very equitable, even now. Back to you, Varsha.
Thank you. I could uh, I wouldn't mind listening to you speak on and on. But interestingly, of all the participants we have, there are two raised hands, both men. Um, so I'll go first with Shakib, who raised his hand first, and then Sandeep, you can ask your question or share your comments.
Hi, Sarika. How are
Hi,
you?
Shakib Bhaiya. It's so good to have you here. Can we see you?
I mean, very interesting. Hello from Nepal first.
Oh, you're in Nepal.
Yeah. And
ये आपसे मिलने आए हैं.
I'm not surprised. He would pamper me so much when I was on campus.
very interesting discussion, Sarika. You talked about Bastar, where I have worked for 3 years also, and you reminded me those, fantastic days when we used to interact with the community, especially, their customs, their cultures, how the deities, women deities were worshipped over there. One of the observations which I had was I just wanted to highlight is that if you move from west to east in India, you see feminization of deities, right? In the western part in Delhi, you will find more Ram and Hanuman more prominent. But if you move down towards Bihar, towards Bengal, and to West Bengal, you see that the even the deities are becoming more stronger over there, right? From
That's right.
Durga, Kali, and
That's
all.
so
Is there
true.
any reason to
Yes.
that? How would you interpret it?
I would look at it very culturally, and my realization with Haryana, Punjab, and the visits that I had made. Like at one point in time, I was an advisor to the Women's Commission centrally, and I remember going to Haryana in amidst a Khap Panchayat, and they did not welcome me. So they said, "We didn't want you here." But it was a place where there was a couple of the same Gotra again who had got married, and
Rohtak.
yes, and the girl's family went and convinced the girl that we'll get you married off in a very proper manner. So why don't you come back? So the girl comes back and they kill her, and then they went across to the boy's place, killed the boy, beheaded him, and carried his head all across the gully. And on that they were having a khap panchayat, and I had walked amidst fire. But I also feel that as you have these external oppression happening more, the response to women and closing down women increases. And if you see Bihar, if you look at all the Bimaru states, and I hate using that word, but look at how poverty is increasing. Look at how they are being largely corporatized, and look at the caste and the religion based feuds, because religion based feuds are not going to stop at religion. They are going to go down to caste, which is what you see in Morena. What has happened? 6 people have been killed in broad daylight. They you you close women further. It's not just amongst Hindus are saying that women should give birth to boys and that is their main responsibility. The Muslim mullahs are saying the same thing. And that has a big spiral circle, and that's something that I have always felt. I felt that in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and Shakib Bhaiya, you were there after tsunami, right? I felt that a lot there because I was trying to click myself with three generations of women. The grandmother, normally how we have Chacha, Dada, and Papa. So it was Nani, Ma, and the girl. And I wanted to click myself. And then you had, it was a matrilocal system of Ongizin. But the men were terribly upset. And they were saying, Nini, we have to be like that. And so how this entire, you have your agency and you have the larger superstructures and they all operate and work on us. But it's a very, very interesting observation that you said about West to East. And yeah, I want to look at their human indices a little more, because HDI and GDI are very closely linked. I mean, irrespective of how simplistic they are, but they are. And
Thank you.
yeah, I will connect with you.
Okay.
Thank you, Shakib. Uh, Sandeep, are you
Yeah,
here?
hi. Hi, yeah, I'm there. I'm
Yes,
there.
please.
Oh, there. Hi.
Hi,
No,
Sandeep.
so, hi, hi. Very interesting talk by you, and very grim, actually. We haven't progressed at all. Now, you talked about the mother goddess. So I just sent you a link of an author. She is a distant relative of mine, Neela Bhattacharya. She
Yes,
is,
yes,
you know about her? Okay,
yes.
okay. So she has done a lot of work on the absent mother goddess in the West, and she has done a lot of field work, and she has written a book also. Now, the point I want to make is that, in the West, let's say Europe or whatever, let's say Europe, the mother goddess is gone, and now we have male gods. And then in India, we have retained our mother goddesses. We have the Kali and the Lakshmi and the Saraswati and all that. But from a gender perspective, I think the West may have lost their mother goddesses, but in terms of gender, their achievements are much more significant, in terms of empowerment of women or equality. Whereas in India, we may worship the mother god and we may do worship Kali and do Durga Puja, but the women, as far as women empowerment is concerned, or oppression, that is very sordid. So what explains this contradiction in our society, that on one hand we are we worship women and god and deities, and Durga and Kali and Shakti, but in our day-to-day dealings, we very much contradict ourselves on a daily basis. So there must be a sociological and religious, of course, underpinning to it. But at some point, these contradictions are so blatant that one wonders why it is so. I would rather not have the mother goddess, but have women gender equality or women more empowered. I would rather have equal rights for women than not have a deity in my house. So how do you react to this?
Oh my gosh, that's a very one that you asked that, but I'm not going to end it here. Now, the first thing I want to say that gender never plays in isolation. So it's a lot of other factors combined with gender. So I am not just a woman, right? I'm a woman from global south. Possibly, I have a caste and a religion which either give me privilege or they oppress me further. And and I also have a racial angle, and Indians are also very racial people, because I remember my husband who's dark and how he struggles to get fairer. But coming back to the racial conversation, as I am here in a very very white university in a place which has 5,000 white population. um, I want to begin by saying that, first, gender doesn't play in isolation. So you have a whole lot of other factors. And given our geographical milieu, there is a culture in which all of us are. So while in India, we might worship goddesses on those 10, 8, 9 days, in reality, our treatment of women is very different. But the Europe, which has more individualized culture, and in India, if I were to look at doxa or the culture and the social norms, which are very very evident, they hit you on the face. So for instance, girls are not just a source of impoverishment economically, because invariably dowry will have to be paid with my marriage, but also socially, because if I remember once that I was placing myself on intersectional parameters, and a woman who was very similar to me said, "Oh, you are the mother of a boy, and I'm a mother of three girls, so I'm going to be behind you."
Oh my
Right.
God.
Yeah, so it's a very complex thing. The second thing is about power, I want to talk about. And so Europe, which has a very individualistic culture, which might not have dowry, which is very rampant, so I wouldn't worry, you can go and sleep. But both in Europe, in one of the crisis centers very close to Nottingham, where I used to work, and teach more in Nottingham University, and in Antigonish Women's Resource Center, which is here, my experience was that forms of violence are different. So it might not be very stark the way it shows. So you have women dying from dowry, which is very very rampant and evident, and women weakening themselves of anorexia because you are in your late 30s and you can't get married and you don't have a partner who's like your solid partner. And how something is very visible in South Asia. So you will often hear people say that South Asia is more patriarchal, but I don't feel it like that. It's
Ah,
just more visible.
visible. Okay.
In Michigan, where I would often go, um, every third woman who gets murdered is because of intimate partner violence, and it's not a spousal violence, right? Two of my friends were raped by the police, right? And it was more brought out in terms of Black Lives Matter and say her name. So it didn't come out in terms of a very strong feminist issue. It had more of a predominance of race over gender, right? So I think that, and power manifests itself in visible, invisible, and hidden ways. So we have to look at the complexity of it, and what we choose to pick up and show, and what we don't. And some of the practices that we have are pretty stark, say killing girls in the womb, or a dowry itself is crazy, right? But they are not very different. They're a little subtle because they have more individualistic societies, and they don't deal with the shit that we do. Sorry for using that word. So it's not very visible. And again, the global north has its own way of projecting itself as developed. So I remember that last year when I was teaching in Nobel Women's Initiative, there was this woman from Kurdistan. And Kurdistan is the midst of conflict, who was being tortured by another white woman who came up to me and said, I wear a hijab. So do you think I cannot be a feminist? And I turned around to this woman and said, you're wearing a short skirt. Does that make you more liberated than somebody who's wearing a hijab out of choice, not coerced on her? It's very cultural, again, why wearing a ghungat or a hijab if I want to do it and I am not coerced. There is a way, because even wearing a skirt, I'm not sure how much I want to do it, because in this weather I certainly wouldn't. Right. So again, it's very complex and it's not very evident. And I've often challenged that this whole thing binary between global north and global south, which makes us feel like we are far, far behind. But the truth remains at the end of the day that we have a song in the feminist movement. कौन कहता है जन्नत इसे, हमसे पूछो जो घर में फंसे, राइट? ना हिफाजत ना इज्जत मिली, करके कुर्बानी हम मर गए. So,
क्या बात है.
so our homes more sacred spaces, number one, and I'm just kind of winding it up. And two, are men equally feminist? Yes, they are. Are women equally patriarchal? Yes, they are. It's an ideology. You believe in it or you don't.
Absolutely.
True.
Over to you, Varsha.
Thank you, Sandeep. Yes, I just had a point there. I was thinking that it's also about how old we are as a civilization, and how much of what we are today is a result of what we have been carrying from all these years. So you did go back to, I mean, you started with saying that patriarchy is about 10,000 years old. How old is our civilization, and when did some of those countries, especially countries like America, if you're not looking at the indigenous populations, then how old is it? It's probably only started evolving afterwards. I mean, even Canada, a large part of the areas in Canada were actually inhabited only much later. So yeah, thank you really for that lovely talk. If there are no more questions, maybe we can close. Manmeet has a raised hand. Sarika, would you mind?
No,
One
not at
last
all.
question.
But I don't have more than 5. I really have to rush to New Glasgow. But we'll listen to Manmeet.
Manmeet, okay. Manmeet,
Thank you.
please, you're
Thank
the
you so
last
much,
one.
ma'am. Yes, this is not a question, but kind of a word of thanks, and also some personal, thing that is coming out here. Mama, Sarika, ma'am, I first interacted with you back on the campus. You had come there for the induction of 2019-21 batch, and I think that was the first time when I was introduced to the concept, or the sphere of gender, and all thanks to you. And I thought maybe IFM will give me more opportunities to learn about this subject. Sadly, it didn't happen because of many factors. I won't get into that. But listening to you today, couple of things that popped up in my mind. One was, I really admire you, how you bring up your personal experiences. I remember during the induction you talked about how you got some death threats, you and your son, and today you talked about your sisters. I mean, these are very personal and very emotional things that come up, and hats off to you that, you connect yourself and your audience with such bridges that, we feel you even more. And then, during the talk, you took us through some history from 30,000-40,000 years ago. I couldn't have even imagined, sitting at my home in front of this laptop, I would have gone so far. I mean, history to me is something what we read in NCRT class 8, 9, 10, nothing beyond that. So really happy and not so happy as well to, learn the intricacies of gender, matriarchy, patriarchy, and so on and so forth. I mean, it just goes on and there's no end to it. And one of the most recent experiences that I had, I'm not sure where this thing fits in, but I would really like to share this with all of you here. So I'm a fresher in terms of the work experience that the audience has here, and so I've lived in a cocoon so far. So I went to a very high profile meeting. It was a government client, and there were two of us from my organization, me and my colleague, very senior to me, a man, and there were some 7, 8 gentlemen from the other side. Mixed age group, seniors and juniors, maybe I think one or two of them even junior to me. So 8 or 9 of us, and I was the only female in the room. And we were talking about policies related to women, how some indicators on women can be included or can be assessed to talk about the quality of life as a whole for the citizenry. And they were saying कि ये indicator रखते हैं, ये important, ज़्यादा important है as compared to indicator X or Y. And they were just talking amongst themselves. I was surprised and also not so surprised that they didn't even consider asking or addressing a woman in the room that what do you think about it. I accept that I was the youngest in the room, maybe the youngest in
Men
the
know
room to
best.
have a voice, but I'm here, come on, you have to at least acknowledge my presence. So yeah, yeah, that was one thing I wanted to share. I don't know where we are going, and we do talk about concepts like agency and women economic empowerment and so on and so forth. But where are we actually heading to if we don't know if we don't know where all of this is coming from? So it was great listening to you. Thank you
My
so
God,
much.
that takes a lot of courage to say what you just said, my sister. And the next time that happens, you just listen to them for the entire thing, and in the end, you just say, "Yeah, you could just ignore me. I'm nothing." Yeah, but it takes double courage. I've had that. It's not that I have not had that experience. There was one time when I would live alone, and there were all these married men with their wives, and wives who worked inside homes, and all the decisions would be taken on at 9 p.m. Over a pack of cigarette. And once I remember them saying, "Oh, I can get packed in an hour," and I turned around and said, "But I can't because I don't have a wife at home, and I have to go home and cook." But it's amazing how they normalize their own hierarchy, and that is why I think we need to have more and more men to shake them up and tell them what they are up to, and that it's not normal to do what you're doing. And I'm very glad that you spoke about it. I'm sure, like, you can really twist their arm if you want to, Manmeet. I hope you will, and I send you a lot of strength to do that. But just don't punish yourself and don't feel guilty about it. It's okay. It happens. The next time it happens, you say, if you are comfortable, you say. And I've realized that with them, pun really works. Like I work with these two white men, and I often tell them, you're the black woman now, huh? So that pun really works. Thank you for sharing, Manmeet.
Right, right. So now we really, really need to close. Sarika has a lot of reading to catch up on. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Sarika, thanks so much for not backing out of this despite your COVID, despite your busy schedule. We have wanted to hear you speak on patriarchy and feminism for the longest time. I'm so thankful that you did it. And we want to hear more and more and more. Thanks so
you.
much.
And I send everyone a lot of love. I hope we see you, get to meet each
Lots
other
of love
again.
to you too. Get well and let's meet when we are not so pressed.